What are you drinking there, little Tara?
You know, it's one of those Mondays.
One of those days.
One of those days.
One of those Mondays.
At least it's a good beer.
Exactly.
Dude, hot take. I don't think Tara's that good.
I mean, it's really not a hot take. I just prefer it to Cass, and then
Yeah, but
there's
like-
one person who prefers Cass to Tara, and we have just
And we
for
have the
2
beef as
years
beefs.
now on social media battled about.
I will drink either of those, and
I actually
skip all the rest.
I actually think one version of height is superior to both of them. I had it in Korea, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually
You're
really
like, oh,
good."
this one is actually the best.
Yeah, I was like,
one.
"Oh, this is actually kind of better," but I'm not gonna post about it, so have to keep up appearances.
You're listening to The Janchi Show, hosted by 3 Korean American adoptees diving headfirst into what it means to be adopted, Korean American, and more. And now, here's your hosts, Nathan, Patrick, and KJ.
Welcome back to the Janchi Show. I am Nathan Nowak, one of your hosts today, along with my Texan host, KJ. Our Indiana host is absent at the moment, but Patrick Armstrong would be our third co-host when he is here. We are the Janchi Show. How are you doing there, KJ?
I am doing well. It is not raining at the moment, which is ideal. We have had so many dang storms rolling through North Texas. It's been super annoying. So
I remember I messaged you a while back about hail because I saw some reports of giant hail in your area. And then literally, I want to say 2 days later, it hailed here larger than I have ever seen. They were like quarter size hail. They ruined all my plants. It was crazy, and it was funny because it was literally, like I said, 2 days or so after I had messaged you about your hailstorm. But luckily, no damage for you or myself other than my plants, I guess.
Yeah, nothing too crazy, but have been tornado touchdowns and strong winds and branches everywhere for like forever, and just like grateful for a day that it doesn't rain, which is wild because we're in the summer, and summer is notoriously the driest, hottest, most horrible part of Texas, and it lasts for 8 months. But here we are being drenched. So I don't know what's up with that.
I saw an interesting thing about tornadoes too, that it's essentially a United States thing. It's yeah.
They don't have them.
They do have them, but very minimally. So I think the comparison was it Europe? I think they compared it to, that had potentially 300 a year, and here it's 1,500 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's literally a United States thing, mainly because the warm air from the Gulf of Mexico and the cold air from the Rockies meet in that tornado alley area, right in the middle. So that is essentially the recipe for those tornadoes, and that's why it happens here all the time, but not anywhere else really in the world. So
wow. Well, I don't have the more you know sound, but I do have a that fact was fun sound. Fun weather facts with Nathan.
I used to live there. I mean, I remember in Oklahoma seeing a few tornadoes. We had a tornado bunker shelter in our basement that was like 6 inches of concrete. And I remember when sirens would go off, we would go downstairs and just hang out. And so,
yeah. Sarah's like, our sirens will go off, and she'll look at me and be like, "Do you want to go somewhere?" And be like, "Where?" Our house is not big enough. It's 1 story. If it's gonna come and take us, it's gonna come and take us.
Yes.
It is what it is. So.
Yeah, that's crazy. But so here we are on another episode. I mean, we're so close to KAAN. This is June 2024. We are coming up upon KAAN. I think if we're releasing this correctly, it's going to be the day before or 2 days before KAAN. So
2 days before, on Juneteenth.
Yeah. No, it's exciting. It's an exciting month. And I'm excited to see you in person, as well as Patrick, and maybe even a special glimpse of Emily and the baby. So
Oh yeah. Plus, I mean, so many other friends. Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. It's like we're not doing a Janchi show live this year that I know of. I don't know. Nothing's been talked
probably
about.
not.
So at this point, all hopes for like anything are off unless we decide to do it in 2 weeks or something. Yeah. So who knows? But yeah, it'll be good for our annual meetup and seeing each other, seeing our friends, and doing a cool thing. So
and meeting some new people too. So that's one thing I enjoy about it. Are you? What else? I know you're doing a session at KAAN, but what else are you excited about for KAAN?
I think I'm just excited to see. This will be my first like really large adoptee meetup. So I'm just excited just to like not excited. More curious. I'm just curious what the vibe is going to be. Curious, like who shows up. I'm always excited to be in a room full of Asian faces, and so I'm looking forward to that. And I will say, generally, the thing I'm looking forward to is like being able to relax my brain. I think this might have come up. Oh, this came up with my co-host for our session. Like when I'm with adoptees, I no longer have to code switch. And I didn't even realize that I was code switching my whole life. So it's just like the mental load on me is like greatly reduced. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. I enjoy not having to explain that I'm adopted because that's...
And all the other rigmarole of being adopted. Yeah. You just get that shorthand. You're just like, yeah, we all get it.
And I mean, this month leading up to it has been a lot of that when I've met new people just in the neighborhood or talking with somebody. And sometimes they ask me what I do. And, I typically, I used to always fall back on just I'm a photographer and things like that. But I want to say within the last few years, I've more leaned into saying I'm a podcaster or I'm a board member on a nonprofit that adoptee conference. And so I kind of lean more into that now, but then that's going into explaining, and I'm a Korean adoptee. So it adds extra layers now that I'm jumping into and explaining. Well, I won't have to do that at KAAN. I can just go in, see the people that I know, meet new people and not have to worry about that. And so, I'm definitely excited about that.
I will say it's really nice. So like if people asked, I would be like, oh yeah, I'm adopted. Then they'd like have a bunch of follow-up questions. But if I lead with, I have a podcast, and they'll be like, what's your podcast about? And I'm like, it's about Korean adoption, blah, 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 whatever. And they'll be like, whatever. And then if they decide to continue asking me about adoption, I'll be like, go listen to the podcast. And like, I'm off the clock.
No, that is a question. Whenever I say I have a podcast, that is the next follow-up question. What's it about?
What's it about?
So,
yeah.
Here's a link. Then I have to spell it. But I'm excited. And we, I just had a great interview today. So I'm excited that everyone here gets to listen to that. It's especially because, the topic of it is something that I have thought about for a while with this year's representation at KAAN, or theme at KAAN as being representation and visibility. So it's definitely something that fits in the theme and also fits in just my own interests that I've seen over the years since this new venture of discovery and everything. I definitely look for ways to connect, and the topics that we talk about with Jean is great, and it's eye opening to me because I need to go back and see some of these reference points.
Yeah. I was so excited to share our interview with Jean. He is a Chinese adoptee who is also queer and disabled, among any number of identity labels that he chooses to place upon himself. And we do kind of a deep dive into a Star Trek mini like plot that spans a couple of episodes. And I have not seen Star Trek at all. So I was like kind of getting lost in it, but it ends up being it is just an interesting discussion on adoptee representation in media, on what it means to relate to those stories, and it takes us a lot of other places. So we're really excited to share that with you, and we are going to roll that right now. Wait, right now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the interview portion of our show. We are here with a guest, which is always my favorite type of podcast to do. Jean, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm just out here surviving, which is all right.
Yeah, I've heard being alive is ideal. So yeah, that's good on you. Well, yeah, we're thrilled to have you here, and we'd like to kick off our interview the way we kick off all of our interviews, and just invite you to tell your story, however feels comfortable to you.
Okay. So you can call me Jean. Think like Jean-Luc Picard. I am a big Trekkie. I am generally a nerd. I have more academic interests. I'm a big history buff. I am an adoptee. I was adopted from China, in Wuhan. That may or may not be a familiar sounding city to many of you, for reasons.
For reasons.
But I was adopted when I was a little less than a year. And I was adopted into a white American family on the East Coast of the United States.
Right on. Is that where you still are now?
Yes, that's where I'm based currently.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned in the form that you filled out that you, beyond being Chinese, which is great because as we've explored kind of the peninsula, if you will, and branching out strictly from Korean adoptees into other adoptees, it's always nice to hear like more stories from different adjacent regions and see how those processes interlap. But yeah, just tell me about, you list in your form like a lot of different identities. You've got disabled, queer, neurodivergent, Chinese, displaced, among other things. And you were a speaker at last year's KAAN. I would love to hear kind of your story of like figuring out the labels that you choose for yourself and how you choose to identify yourself with all of your identities. And are you just like, I don't know, like, I know that we wear all of them all the time, but yeah, like, did it take time for you to get comfortable being like, this is who I am? Or were you just like, no, this is who I am, and we're just going to live into that?
So I think to like sum it up the best, I like this quote from Joel Kim Booster, who is a Korean adoptee comedian. He said, "I knew I was gay before I was Asian." And that was something that resonated with me, of course, as a queer adoptee, Asian adoptee. And it made me laugh. I was like, yeah, I feel that, you know? And I think it's just, you're always learning about yourself. We're never stagnant beings. And I think it's important to try different identities. And some of those identities that you listed, I, may or may not still identify with them at the time I submitted the form. And that's not because I dislike the identity, but it just doesn't fit. I don't have any, and sometimes, and that's okay. We can come into identities and leave them as well. Like, we all had an identity as like a teenager, but as we mature and grow, we don't identify as a teenager. Like, we don't identify with that stage of our life. Does that mean that stage was bad? Not necessarily. It just means change just happens, and that's okay.
Yeah, 100%.
And also the education of learning about more terminology and other people's stories and relating to other people's stories. I found over the past 3 years that we've been doing this, that a lot of things that my outlook on certain topics have changed, or terminology that I used in the past has changed. And I think that has changed my identity as well, of wanting to appreciate myself more as well. So again, thank you for being on the show. And I know this isn't the end, but I just wanted to throw out the thank you already.
We just got the party started.
It was. Nathan was like, and that's all the time I have. I'm out of here. It was incredible. So yes, you mentioned that you were a big nerd and big Trekkie. And again, in your form, you mentioned I'm a Trekkie. You love discussing themes of adoption within the franchise as well as other pieces of media. So I am not a big Trekkie. I know very little about the franchise, but the more I hear about it, I'm like, I should watch this, I guess. Apparently, like all of its like kind of social views, I'm like very on board with. But yeah, so I don't know. Talk to me about you and adoption and Star Trek, apparently.
So that's a great time to talk about KAAN, the convention that's happening this month at the time of this recording. And of course, I think we're all going to be there. And one of my sessions that I am presenting is going to be about adoption themes in sci-fi specifically. And I am going to talk about Star Trek, the importance of, having a character or characters, to connect with as adoptees. So the character I kind of immediately go to and talk about, and the one I connect with the most in Star Trek is Worf, who is a Klingon, which is an alien. Interestingly enough, the Klingons also have a little bit of an Orientalist history to them as well, because the franchise was made during the Cold War. And even a franchise that is considered to be progressive for the time still has its pitfalls, and it's important to acknowledge that. But Worf as a character, sticks out to me as a very clear metaphor for a transracial adoptee experience. He is a Klingon. Whose parents were killed in an attack by the Romulans, another Star Trek alien race. And he was taken in by two humans and raised within a human community and family. And I will talk more about this during my KAAN presentation, but in it, there's an episode called Family, and there is, I guess you could call it like the B or C plot with Worf and his parents, and specifically the perspective of Worf's parents in their conversation with the ship's bartender. And so in the episode, we see there's a conversation between the bartender and Worf's parents, and they talk about having a Klingon son, or raising a Klingon son. And it was something that, like, for a show from the 80s, I would say it is like a decent representation of like adoptive parents who are willing to learn from their adoptee and learn with them. Because in that episode, I think it was Worf's father said something like, "Oh, we had to let Worf explore his Klingon identity," and referring to his Klingon identity himself. We knew that there weren't other Klingons around us, and so we let him explore his own identity on his own terms. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight. It has to be on Worf's terms, and that's Worf's journey. And his parents seem like it's implied, very much so, that they are there for him and they will be in his corner. But Worf's mother says something like, "Oh, well, I think he thinks that we won't understand him." And I think that is a very common thing that adoptees go through, right? Like, "Oh, will our adoptive parents understand us?" Because specifically transracial adoptees, because we are like racialized differently from those around us. And it's something that takes time to navigate. And I mean, I'm sure you two both understand this experience.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I definitely do. And here's the thing. I am a Star Trek fan. I actually have every Next Generation on DVD. I have the series.
Do you like Star Trek Lower Decks?
So I haven't gotten into that yet.
It's great. I love Lower Decks. Also,
I haven't even gotten into Discovery yet, too. But what I was going to say is, actually, I don't know how old you are, and I know we're not ages on the show, but I think I am much older than you are. And I used to watch Star Trek when they were on TV and they were coming out as episodes.
Okay, you don't have to brag, sir.
So no, but the thing is, at the age that I was and I was watching these episodes, I don't actually remember that one. I remember seeing Worf's parents, but I don't remember that specific episode. And I'm just curious. I didn't relate to him, even though I knew he was adopted. And I look back at that right now and I'm thinking that's kind of weird, is that I should have, in a way, like maybe at least made that comparison. But maybe it was because I was probably 13 at the time when these were airing. But so my question, I guess, for you, how old were you when you started to watch these in that episode specifically? And what was it like to make that connection? Like, what was it that really made that point? Because everything that you said, I'm like, oh yeah, they were kind of, Asian, because they even had swords that looked like kind of like
katanas, kind of.
Yeah, well, they were like double swords, curved swords. They had a lot of facial hair, kind of Siberian style. But those are all things that I didn't even really think about until you started talking about that. So what age did you start getting into these and start relating to that?
So I got into Star Trek over the pandemic through my friends.
Okay.
So I was, and as I mentioned, I am from Wuhan, China. So during that time, I also was kind of dealing with my adoptee identity for the first time. And so I was, I guess I'm just more attuned to, I like reading deeper meanings into shows and stuff. I like to think deeply about things. I'm very much in my head, as they say.
Man, I think that's so interesting that you were going through your Trek fandom alongside the pandemic, alongside of your adoptee identity. Can you talk to me about being from Wuhan, COVID-19, that's got to feel like a lot. But before we get into that, just tell me, did you have any conversations, I guess, with your with your adopted family about being Chinese, about being Asian American, leading up to that? So what was your process of racialization, if any? Or was it all just 2020 was the year for many things?
So I had independently, thought more about politics and the world around me from about the age of 16. But race conversations with my parents didn't really happen. Now, I do think my adoptive father was a bit more open to those conversations. He was a history teacher, so he thought it was important to learn history and to study it, to grow from it as a society. And he was, I would say, a fairly classically liberal person, he wasn't radical one way or another, but he seemed open-minded.
Yeah, so not a lot of talk about race. Did your parents, were they celebratory or open to you exploring your own Chinese-ness? Or were they just no, we don't, focus over here. Let's do something else. You don't need to worry about being Chinese.
So when I was younger, my mother would take me to these adoptee camp things. I don't know if you've ever been to one of a Korean version of that, but it was these not camps, but they were activities for adoptive family, families with adopted children from China. And I went to them. They were sometimes they were fun, but so there was always a raffle for Chinese New Year. And I enjoy raffles. I love raffles. I love auctions. I love you can put your name down. I love silent auctions. I'm really good at them. But when I remember telling my mother I didn't want to like do any of those things. And like I remember when I was like in kindergarten and first grade, my mother made me pass out these like red envelopes. And I, remember feeling like uneasy and just like weird about it.
Yeah.
I just like being, an adoptee for me was not really thinking about it at all. And so like it just didn't, it wasn't something I actively thought about for like up until 2020. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
No, that totally did, because I always make a distinction because in my life there was a distinction about being raised ethnically Korean versus being raised Asian American. So then we jump to 2020. You watch a Star Trek. COVID breaks out. You're thinking about what it means to be an adoptee. You're thinking about maybe being Chinese again. What was going through your mind at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I assume like everyone else, it was, what are we gonna do now? Like, but like, I definitely was able to find spaces where I could, explore my identity in a way with people that I was okay with being around. I have now like many Asian friends. Mostly they are they're either Southeast Asian or East Asian, but they had helped me, to look at my, I guess, culture and identity as I guess a Chinese person with, a different perspective. And I think that they, help open my eyes in a way, just in seeing how like a lot of our society plays into like, especially like us, if you being transracial adoptees, and in particular raised in white families, that like a lot of our feelings toward ourselves and our identity, like for me, it was something I didn't really want anything to do with until I was like confronted about it.
Yeah.
But, for me, it was just something that I, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And then the Star Trek was really the thing that kind of started it all. Did you at that point also start going into other science fiction to look for other stories? Like, I mean, if we're talking science fiction, like Luke Skywalker, right? I mean, not to cross Star Trek and Star Wars, but
no, actually, my friend got me into Star Trek. They recommended it to me, and it didn't necessarily overlap until like it like hit later, But I just thought that connection was cool, and it was just something I personally resonated with. The Klingons are actually my favorite Star Trek species. I just find them, they're just a very classic, iconic, Star Trek alien. And I think their history with their Orientalist roots is quite fascinating as well.
Okay, I got to ask then, do you know any Klingon?
I do not. Well, wait, I know Kapla. It means...
Oh, yeah.
Kapla. That one. But no, I don't. But I do know you can do it on Duolingo, and I have done a few of the ones on Duolingo. But no, I cannot speak Klingon, unfortunately.
It's okay. There's actually, I know there's a dictionary. But
I searched Klingon on Google just to figure out what they look like and remind myself what the character design was. And literally the first search result at like the autocomplete was Klingon to English. And I was like, well, there we go.
Yeah. Well, the old generation and the new generation Klingons look different too, but that's another story.
All right. Yeah, this is not a Star Trek podcast.
Bummer. We could do a spin-off podcast.
Well, just talk about it at KAAN when we're all together.
I mean, I think there's other characters you could definitely talk about in Star Trek, but no, it's very interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and find that episode to watch it to see how it hits me now. I feel that way when I watch it. I mean, any pop culture or TV series or things that I used to watch, I've had a lot more like aha moments now, being out of the fog and more navigating things and thinking, oh, I did never relate to that prior to all of this. I didn't even realize that this person was adopted, or it never really struck me as an important theme in a series or a movie or something like that. You just kind of knew that they were. And I think that's something that since then, in the last 5-6 years, I've really enjoyed now picking those moments out and then, of course, judging them on whether they are good or bad. So
that's funny.
But, yeah.
I'd also say too, to your point about seeing it and then not really resonating with the character when you were younger, Nathan, I think there's also, and this is kind of what KAAN is about this year, and I think what we in the adoptee space often talk about when we talk about media representation is A, do we have enough? And B, is it good? But then C, and this is like the next level, is when we do have enough and it is good, we don't have to resonate with every story. We don't have to. It's just it's the scarcity of it that drives us to go looking and to force ourselves maybe sometimes to find a connection when perhaps like when there is a plentiful amount of representation, then there is less need to be like, oh yeah, now I can, like, I have to throw my support behind this person. But like, no, there's one story, but there's also 10 more stories. And if I don't resonate with one, it's fine. I'll find the one that I do resonate with. It's just in the scarcity that I think we find that hard to consider. I noticed, I looked up the schedule. John, you're speaking with my friend Maddie, which is really exciting. And one of the things that I have appreciated talking with her about is the intersection of disability and adoption, and the adoptee identity. And one of the things that I love talking to any member of the queer community on our podcast is the intersection of queer identity and adoptee-ness. Because to me, I think specifically, it was like, if you had I guess for myself, my own self-racialization and my own coming to consciousness as an adoptee felt like a type of coming out. And as really like, just as I've grown as a person, but really like, I think that experience, like the parallels are there. And then wrestling with, especially some of the visible and invisibleness of disability with the visible and invisibleness of being like, especially an Asian adoptee, where it's like sometimes you don't see race and then sometimes you definitely see race. It's just been interesting. What's been your experience living in all three of these identities?
Okay, so shout out to my friend Maddie. Me and Maddie presented together last year, and we're presenting again this year, as you mentioned. I think it's very interesting because you're never any of those identities separately.
Yeah.
You're always your identities together, And I think different identities, like in different situations, different identities are more prominent than the other. Speaking specifically, like you said, as a queer person, I don't know if you've experienced specifically the racialization of, East and Southeast Asian men, and how in the dating world, specifically, East Asian men tend to be perceived as feminine and less masculine, over, compared to, your non-Asian counterparts. And and there is a problem with, hypermasculinization just as much as, demasculinization for groups. But in the context of Asian, like East Asian, since we're all East Asian here, I'm just going to say East Asian masculinity. It's very interesting, as, when you step into that intersection as a queer man and how your perceived is very interesting in that you may be perceived to be, as we say, as being a sub or being, the one who is, less dominant in the relationship or the bedroom. And that is due to stereotypes about, the feminization of, East Asian men. Like if you think about like soybeans, and how soy has become a pejorative. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but soy has become like a derogatory term for an effeminate man, being a soy boy. And so it's interesting to see that that specific food is native to China and is plentiful in many East Asian cuisines and is eaten regularly, daily. And it's like not a big deal in, East Asian culture. And I think that's kind of an example of how, being an East Asian man, when you are gay or are queer in some regard, your masculinity tends to be taken less seriously compared to your counterparts. And I don't know if you've specifically experienced that or not.
I think for me, well, certainly not being taken less seriously, but I used to play, I used to be a professional musician, and people would come up to me after service or whatever, and they would be like, "Oh man, you play guitar so well and with your hand and whatever." And like, you didn't need to add with your hand. It would have been fine if you just said you play guitar so well. So I do always feel like there was like a thing to come up against, and I also wonder. So like part of my own story, and this is something that I'm hoping to write about here soon. I'm going to become a dad in August, all things going well. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is in my own kind of like journey of self-racialization, full adoptee consciousness, kind of all these things, which I just broadly called the apocalypse. Now that I'm post-apocalypse, I think about my, so I would probably call myself genderqueer if I had the guts to do so. But I'm still like, I don't even know if that's right necessarily, because I think I feel that to what you were saying, that sense of like, I'm not a typical like masculine male. And sometimes when I see myself do the things that are traditionally male or traditionally masculine or whatever, just traditional cishet man, I'm like, that I don't like that, even though I like it's a thing that I did and I'm like happy that I did it. So it's like there is some type of like, I don't know, but then it's also like, is it just because you're Asian that you feel weird about your masculinity, or that you feel like you need to be a certain way about it? Yeah. So all that to say, I get it, kind of as much as I can in my own experience, but yeah, it's just kind of a weird thing to come up against, and is always something that is on my mind.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that I've always hated being judged on types of things that I do being something that would be masculine or not masculine.
Mm-hmm.
Like I always felt that was just unfair and just not something that I was raised with, as far as in my family, that my parents wouldn't have any judgments on whatever I did, and they would never say this is something you shouldn't do because it's not a masculine thing or things like that. So I always felt like I did a lot of it, but I would still get judged, I think, occasionally with peers and asked, why are you doing this, or what are you gay, because I was doing something different. And I was like, why would you ask that? It just always confused me and frustrated me. I hated that. So yeah, I'm something to pass down to my kids, I guess, is to let them know that they can do whatever they want. They can, be whatever they want.
Yeah, give them that nonconformist sensibility.
Yeah, wear whatever color you want. I mean, so yeah, it's and I hope more people, do that too. So
yeah, Jean, where are you at now when you think about your journey as a fully conscious adoptee? You've spoken at some cons. You're speaking at this con. Yeah, what do you see in the near or distant future in terms of kind of your identity journey, your community journey, or any of that?
Yeah, for con and after con.
Okay, not really like that, but
Well, I think I feel like I'm a lot more secure in my identity as, an Asian person and specifically a Chinese person, and I think that is something that I appreciate, my friends, being supportive of this identity, like my Asian friends,
yeah,
being supportive of my, position as, an adoptee, and like how it affects the way like I feel about like my culture and my like heritage. And I think one of the things, like I had mentioned was that like when you are an adoptee, like a transracial adoptee, oftentimes the most interactions with your culture is based in racism, or so it's based in things that are negative. It's based in hostility. It's not based in having the joy of community on like Chinese New Year or whatever, like with your family, and like eating kanji, or it's not that. It's like there's not always positive experiences to balance out the negative ones in terms of being racialized as Asian, as a transracial adoptee, or I would say racialized in any way as a transracial adoptee. But I'm Asian, so that's why I'm saying it.
yeah. So moving forward, then, are you looking to make more positive experiences?
Yeah, I suppose. I think that like it is important to make good memories, and I love having my friends be, with me, and them being supportive in my identity, and like finding that and being secure in, and like being more secure in that, and like but it's also important for me to not like, I don't always want to like think about like adoptee related things, and that's okay too,
Yeah.
and like I can just be content on my own terms. I can think about it when I want to, and I guess I've made a lot more peace with it than I had.
Yeah, that's fantastic. John, that was cheers to you making more happy memories in the future, to building more positive relationships with all of your intersectional identities, and for having a community that backs you and that supports you in doing that. And for you being able to turn your brain off and just be like, I don't want to think about any of this, because we definitely need that as well.
And for being a voice too.
Yes. It has been so good to have you on the show. I will be at your presentation, at least one of them. So I'm excited to meet you in real life and to see you and connect with you that way. Speaking of connecting, if people want to find you or what you're up to on the internet, how can they do so?
So, you guys can follow my adoption related account on Instagram. It's at displaced Klingon. Because again, I'm a Star Trek fan. If you haven't noticed that by now. But yeah, so if you want to reach out to me there, you can check out my account. I post whatever I want to. I'm very lax about when I post. And if I post anything and what I post, like I recently actually did more of an analysis post about a show called The Owl House, which I love. It's a Disney show. It's amazing. It's like technically a kid show, but it's kind of like Avatar, where it's like, wow, there's like a lot of things the grown-ups can take away from it too. And it's really cool in terms of LGBTQ representation. Anyway, you can reach out to me on my Instagram, but thank you for having me on your podcast. And I will see you both at KAAN, hopefully. Oh, and if you're going to KAAN, check out my presentation. It is called The Wrath of Khan, and it is a play on the Star Trek movie, The Wrath of Khan, but it's spelled Khaan. So,
Yeah.
Nice.
We're so excited to be able to meet you and to have you on the show, and it's been really great having you here. If you want to connect with us, you can do so at Janchi Show on all of our social platforms, or send us an email to janchishow@gmail.com. If you're into the voicemail texting thing, you can drop that at 972-677-8867. We will read those and or play those on the air and respond to them, because we like hanging out with you, my dear listener, except for Patrick, who obviously has not been here. He is probably busy being a dad. I don't know. I've heard having a newborn is a lot. You can connect with me. I am at KJ Roelke, wherever I want to be found on the internet. Patrick is at Patrick in the World, wherever he wants to be found on the internet. Nathan, where are you at, wherever you want to be found on the internet?
I am Ed Nowak on Instagram and Nathan Nowak on Facebook. So you can sometimes find me in the Facebook group After Party, but we're not too active in there. But maybe one day we'll make it a little more active.
If you would please leave us a rating or review on any platform, you can do that. That'd be fantastic. You can go to janchishow.com/support to find out how you can support the show more, or I think janchishow.com/store. To check out our merch options. So thank you for hanging out with us. Jean, again, thank you for being here. And
Thanks so
listeners, until next week, Janchi,
Hail!